Welcome to Movie Recall. In today's video, we will be going through the 2018 movie Boarding School. It's time to recall. Let's get started. Turn on subtitles and spoilers ahead. The movie starts and we see Jacob, who is a 12-year-old boy and happens to be really afraid of the dark. He is in his room and he uses a bunch of stuff to cover the mirror in his room and also tries to keep the door a little ajar. His mother, however, tells him to keep the lights off and the door closed at night. Jacob then gets in bed hoping that he will not have nightmares tonight. However, the plan does not work, and the next thing we see, the boy is screaming his lungs out. His mother wakes up. She is really frustrated because she seems to be sick of this routine. She goes on to wake up Jacob from his nightmare. They are then joined by Jacob's stepdad, who seems to be nicer to him. He sees that the boy has wet the bed, so they move their conversation to the bathroom. He tells Jacob that he should apologize to his mother for this. Jacob goes to her room and finds her meditating. He says sorry and gets back without getting a reply from his mother. The next day, Jacob hears his mom crying and goes to her room. He asks why she is crying, and his dad tells him that his grandmother died. His mother, however, says that she is not crying because of that, as his grandmother was a horrible person, so it is better that she died. Later on, they go to a cemetery to bury his grandmother. Jacob has never met her because his mother never allowed that to happen. When the burial is going on, Jacob is approached by an old woman who claims to be his grandmother's friend. She out of nowhere goes on to show him her scars, telling him that these scars were given to her by Nazi soldiers every time they raped her. She also tells him how his grandmother used to sharpen her teeth, and this freaks out the boy. This is when Jacob's mother gets there and takes the boy away. She then goes on to tell him that the old woman is crazy. Later on, his mother and stepdad go out to watch a musical show, leaving him alone in the house. When his mother is about to leave, she tells him to read a book she gave to him and not watch TV, because she thinks that when Jacob watches TV before going to bed, it triggers his fear of the dark, and then he ends up having nightmares. When his mother leaves, he goes on to do the same thing yet again. He turns on the TV and ends up watching a horror movie. The next evening, the family has dinner with his stepdad's boss and his family. When they are having dinner, there is a certain tension at the table as Christine, their 12-year-old daughter, does not at all like her stepmother, and they keep butting heads. Christine and Jacob are then told to go to a room and hang out. Christine is a cunning girl. She keeps teasing Jacob, who starts getting annoyed when she calls him pretty. He says that he does not like to be called pretty because this word is used only for girls. He would prefer the word handsome better. She, however, still goes on to call him pretty. They then go on to talk about a comic book Jacob has been reading, and this is when Christine tries to make a move on the boy, but to her bad luck, Jacob's mother walks in. The next day, the bullies at his school go on to search his bag and end up finding female gloves. They then go on to beat him up for being girly, and his mother goes on to tell him that these movies and comic books are the reason he is becoming like that. The boy, despite being the victim of bullying, ends up being suspended from the school. The next day, his mother and stepdad leave for their jobs and Jacob is alone in the house. When he is making himself breakfast, he goes on to hear a noise. He gets back to the living room to check and sees that a vase has been knocked down. He then goes on to find some of his deceased grandmother's stuff in the house. He goes on to put on her clothes and starts dancing to the music. This goes on for a while, and amidst the music, he does not realize that his stepdad has come home early and he has seen everything that he has been doing. David, the stepdad, later goes on to tell him that he is going to keep this incident a secret, but he does tell Jacob that he needs help. Jacob and his stepdad are then seen entering an office where they meet Mr. Sherman, who happens to be the head of a boarding school. Jacob does not want to go, but he really does not get to have much of a say in this. It is decided that he will be going to the boarding school. His family hits the road, and after a long drive, they get to the boarding school where they are welcomed by Mrs. Sherman. She shows them around, and later on, Jacob is taken to his room where he goes on to ask why on earth does his room have 2 beds. He is told that he will be living with a roommate who is on his way. He keeps the lights on when he goes to sleep, but wakes up when he realizes that he is not alone in his room. His roommate Phil, who has a disfigured face because he once got burned. Jacob gets really scared seeing his face and runs out of the room, only to run into Phil's parents, who are still outside, and go on to tell Jacob how the boy got that face. Jacob then makes his way back to the room and goes on to talk to Phil, who is really not that bad. He then apologizes to Phil for his reaction earlier. The next day, Jacob is to go to his first class at his new school. He goes on to see 2 of his classmates who are twins named Frederick, who is a Tourette sufferer, and Elwood, who suffers from autism. This is when Phil goes on to join them at the table, and all the students go on to scream at seeing him sitting with them. Dr. Sherman right away gets there and tells them to behave themselves. Later on, Jacob also goes on to see Christine, whom he, of course, has met before. Dr. Sherman then joins the boys and goes on to explain to them the rules of the classroom and the boarding school. They're told of a very hectic routine all of them are supposed to follow, and Christine does not like it. She goes on to say that her dad did not tell her any such thing. She says that she was thinking that this is a hotel and life is going to be fun there. She feels suffocated at this place already and tries to run out of the class. Dr. Sherman right away goes on to stop her from getting the hidden stick out of his coat and goes on to hit her with the stick multiple times. Christine starts crying and just like that, makes her way back to her seat. Time goes by at the school, and one day while Frederick and Jacob are playing catch when they are joined by Christine, the students then start sharing how they ended up in this place. Christine goes on to say that this is not a regular school because they were there for just 2 weeks, and after that, they won't have to deal with Dr. Sherman. That night, Jacob and Phil sit together and they have a conversation about how Phil is interested in astronomy and he believes that there is much more out there in space that humans don't know. Jacob, in turn, goes on to tell him how his father died, adding that he died in a fire but changes his statement later on, telling Phil that he said the fire thinking that it might make Phil better. The next day, when they are in the class, Christine asks permission from Dr. Sherman to go to the bathroom. The man tells her that she has just 3.5 minutes. However, she takes way more than that, and Dr. Sherman again goes on to beat her with the stick. Later, she tells Jacob to go with her to a secluded place, and the two end up in a bathroom. She tells Jacob that earlier she did not go to the bathroom, rather, she went to Mr. Jacob's office, and there she found out that Mrs. Sherman is not who she appears to be. As they talk, Christine again starts teasing him and tells him that he acts like a girl, because he refuses to touch her face. She then makes him touch her face, and this is when Mrs. Sherman catches them together in the bathroom. She goes on to ask why they are together in there, and Christine tells her that she was unable to turn on the faucet, so she asked Jacob for help. Later that night, when Jacob and Phil are in the room, Phil goes on to tell Jacob that he walks in a weird way. Jacob asks how his walk is weird, and Phil says that he walks like a girl. Jacob is upset to learn that, but before he can say anything, he hears a loud noise coming from the other room. When he goes to check, he finds Elwood banging his head against the wall. Jacob helps him up and takes him to the bathroom to help him wash up, but when he opens the curtains, he finds Frederick dead as the boy has committed suicide. Dr. Sherman is told about this. He takes care of the body and tells the guard to take the body to the hospital. He then tells the other students to go back to their rooms. Christine notices that the guard is not at the gate anymore guarding it, so she goes on to try and use this opportunity to flee the school. She also invites Jacob and he agrees. They tell Phil to come along, but he declines the offer, adding that he does not at all want to get in trouble. The two then leave the school and they end up in the wilderness, and out there they realize that they really have nowhere to go. So they get back to the school and ask Dr. Sherman to forgive them. Later on, Sherman goes on to tell Jacob that Frederick did not commit suicide. He then goes on to reveal why Christine is in this school, adding that the girl killed her own brother and then made her own mother commit suicide because she was too depressed because of Christine. Sherman then goes on to ask Jacob to help him take care of the other students, and Jacob agrees to do it. Jacob starts doing his duties. He goes on to make sure that the students are comfortable and safe. He even helps them with their different needs and makes sure they are safely in their beds. Jacob then goes to Christine. He right away confronts her, asking her if she actually killed Frederick. She admits to doing it, adding that she did it to create a distraction to be able to escape the school. Christine then goes on to tell him to put on her grandmother's dress. He refuses to do that, and she tells him to do it or she will kill Elwood too. Jacob then goes on to wear the dress because he does not want the innocent boy to be killed when he has worn the dress. She goes on to get a pair of scissors and go on to cut her hair short. She turns on music and the two go on to dance. She then tries to stab Jacob, but he grabs her hand. He manages to overpower the girl and pins her down on the bed. When he is on top of her, she goes on to tell him that she loves him. She says that she has been in love with him ever since she first saw him. Christine goes on to say that she tried stabbing him because she wanted Jacob to beat her up. She goes on to say that she feels strange pleasure when she is beaten up and then tells Jacob to spend the night with her. Jacob, however, goes on to decline. He, however, goes on to invite Christine to join him and Phil in his room. They go to his room and lie together looking at the stars. After a while, Jacob wakes up and sees that both Phil and Christine are asleep. He, however, feels like something is wrong and goes to check in on Elwood, only to find him dead in his bed. An argument between Dr. and Mrs. Sherman, whose real identity is Lynn Adams, reveals that it was she who had murdered Elwood and that the children will all die that night. He finds the bodies of the real Dr. and Mrs. Sherman and Frederick stashed in the freezer in the basement. A conversation between Mrs. Ramsey and Dr. Sherman suggests a prior arrangement where, being unable to cope with Elwood's condition, Mrs. Ramsey had sent him there to be killed off seemingly in an accident, a fate that awaits all the other children. Ms. Adams stabs Ramsey to death, Dr. Sherman slits Ms. Adams' throat and kills the groundkeeper. Dr. Sherman reveals to Jacob that he has been contract killing since he was around Jacob's age, and his plan is to have everyone in the house killed in a fire. Jacob also finds out that it was his stepfather, Davis, who had him sent there to rid himself and Isabel of him. Jacob manages to bludgeon Dr. Sherman to death and set him on fire. He evacuates everyone from the house except Christine, whom he leaves for dead as a way of avenging Frederick's death. Having declared his love for Christine, Jacob peels off his dress, showing his true, naked self to his friends for the first time. Now rescued, the children reunite with their parents as Jacob whispers to Phil's father that he knows of his intention and promises to make him regret it if anything happens to Phil. Phil's dad then looks at him in shock and disbelief. Jacob is finally reunited with his mother, and when they are having dinner, his stepdad goes on to say that his school is willing to take him back, not knowing that Jacob already knows the truth. Having finally overcome his fear of the dark, Jacob waits as Isabel's terrified screams are heard from the dinner table. Davis dies from ingesting poisoned wine tainted by the same poison Dr. Sherman used to attempt to kill Mrs. Ramsey. It is Jacob who has poisoned the wine. He has now become strong, and with that, the movie comes to an end. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new movie recaps.